Do you want more success, more growth, more results? Then it's time for the Boundless Success Accelerator from the Modern Observer Group. This isn't your average coaching program. It's where top performers come to dominate. Weekly group sessions, on-demand coaching, a community that's got your back, and a power-packed library of tools to supercharge your business and career. No more excuses, no more waiting. Get in, level up, and start building the life you've been dreaming about. Visit us at modernobserver.com/boundlesssuccess to join today. Let's get you to the next level.
Welcome to another edition of Carnivore Bites. I'm your host, Jeff Sherman, along with the esteemed Dr. Eric Lopkin. And breaking news, you can fill our listeners in on that one as we do this podcast on Wednesday.
Yeah, we're recording.
September 10th.
We are recording this Wednesday, September 10th at 3 o'clock, and Charlie Kirk of Turning Point USA has just been shot at Utah Valley University. It's a breaking story, so we don't have a lot, but we do have a statement from a college spokesperson. It says, what we know currently is that Charlie Kirk was about 20 minutes into his presentation when we heard shots fired from a nearby building, and to the best of our knowledge, he was hit and taken with his security team away from the premises, and the courtyard was cleared. That's a statement from a UVU spokesperson. And again, it's breaking news. So we're hoping he will be okay, but he has been evacuated from the scene and I believe taken to a nearby hospital.
Excellent update. We all wish him the best. I watch him all the time, and very interesting content. Wish him the best. Well, Uncle Joe is kind of the gift that keeps on giving, isn't it, Dr. Lopkin? Can you tell the listeners what I'm referring to?
Yeah, we just got revised job numbers from the Bureau of Labor Statistics, and it turns out that for the last year, actually going March 2024 to March 2025, the job numbers that had come out from the Biden administration were exaggerated by almost 1 million jobs.
That's close.
Yeah, we created 1 million jobs fewer than the Biden administration was claiming.
Oh, well, I mean, it is, it's within the margin of error, correct? Just kidding.
No, that's not even close to the margin of error. And the impact of it is huge because, first of all, aside from lying about how well the economy was doing under Bidenomics, it also convinced the Fed not to lower interest rates, which has only sped up the deterioration of our economy. And
Correct.
On top of that, it goes to show something that Trump has been talking about for the last several weeks, about how the numbers are being generated and how inaccurate they are. And it just proved it. This is why Trump fired the head of the Bureau of Labor Statistics a few weeks ago. Everybody was saying, because they're saying his job numbers aren't good. No, when you're missing your estimates by 1 million, it's time to redo how these statistics are being compiled.
Well, to put that in perspective, 1 million, essentially, Dr. Lopkin, you can have, let's just say, lunches every day, have some martinis, and at the last 5 minutes when the numbers are about to need to be published, I should say, just say, yeah, Lopkin, no, what do you think? 250,000. That sounds good. Okay, let's run with it. In other words, you are not doing your job. That's impossible.
Here's the thing.
Missing it by 50,000. I got it.
This is how the numbers are collected and why they do tend to be so inaccurate and we have so many revisions. Is that there's no real science to this. The initial numbers that the Bureau of Labor Statistics releases is a survey. They literally call businesses and say, well, are you hiring? How many of you hiring? How many jobs did you have? How many do you have now? But let's face it, when was the same way that election polling has been very inaccurate because people don't answer their phones? Guess what? Businesses are not responding to this. So they're releasing these numbers. I'm actually guessing at this point, they don't even have a statistically significant sample when they release the initial numbers.
Well, what do you think of there's two reports. There's the ADP report, which is basically hard numbers, and then there's a survey that gets more notoriety. I wonder if it should really just go the way of the platypus.
Yeah, I mean, the survey is not working, and the revisions do come from hard data. The ADP number also isn't as accurate as it used to be because ADP is using its own customer data. Well, back in the day when ADP started this, if you had a large, business, if you had payroll, you used ADP. They basically had a monopoly on it, so they had all the data. This is no longer the case. There are hundreds of smaller payroll companies, other competitors. So ADP doesn't have all the data either anymore.
Okay, so overall, you'd have to say there needs to be a major re-engineering of this or some couching at least of the numbers. Because I remember when it used to be revised, 10,000, a million, that's just, you're not even, like you said, statistically significant. There's no even relevancy of it. So I don't know. But you're right. Your point is more than well-founded. It's the whole thing about, Jerome Powell, being late all the time. But yes, if these numbers, let's just say if they did publish the accurate numbers, then I'm sure we would have several basis points in terms of rate reductions, but we don't. And let me just add one other thing. We have high interest rates, and we also have an increasingly, I'll use the term, susceptible real estate market, and especially in certain areas. So the high rates certainly don't help that.
Well, the high rates have slowed down the real estate market, certainly. A bigger impact, though, is people's credit card debt. And remember, we talked about this a few months ago, where credit card debt was at an all-time high. Well, guess what?
Mm-hmm. Defaults too.
Yes, defaults also, primarily because the interest rates shot up. So had Jerome Powell had this correct data, we could have seen lower interest rates. The Fed looks at a lot of different things, so we can't guarantee they would have lowered it, but the odds would have been so much higher. It would have...
It's pretty likely.
Yeah, it would have had that trickle effect where interest rates for credit cards could have dropped. The debt rates, certainly mortgage rates would have dropped. And it would have had a domino effect into the entire economy. So now... And honestly, I'm not convinced. I'm going to put on my tinfoil hat for a minute, but I'm not convinced this isn't part of the problem. I don't think anybody in the administration thought Biden was going to win another term. And I think at least some of this, the delay in getting the correct numbers, is so the politicians could have some cover and go, oh, look, these horrible numbers came out during the Trump administration.
Nothing surprises me given the magnitude of the deep state, something that I thought was just a talking point 10, 15 years ago. Now that's one of the bigger things that concerns me. But speaking of concern, there's a lot of concern and negative feelings or attitudes or prospects in terms of people being interviewed by the New York Times survey. It's the lowest it's been in terms of people's enthusiasm, likelihood of finding a job. It's the lowest it's been since 2013. That also could play obviously a huge effect on future economic growth, health. If you don't think you're going to find a job, and I did hear, by the way, that it is a horrific job market for recent college graduates. That's a la 1981. Not going to be good for the economy.
No, it's not good for the economy. I am going to correct you on one thing. It was not a New York Times survey that found this. It was the New York Fed that conducted the survey.
Yes.
So,
That's
yeah,
correct.
Which quite frankly, I think is worse.
Yeah, of course it is.
Because they're using this data to make economic decisions, and they're finding people are terrified of losing their jobs because they don't believe they're going to find another one. So and you're going to see that's going to also have a ripple effect, because that's going to affect consumer confidence, which in turn affects consumer spending. And the U.S.
Oh yeah, I mean, if you're in a situation, well, let's say let's just say you're in a situation, this is a real quick scenario, and you're out of work, but the job market's hot like it was 2 years ago. You might continue to spend, maybe not at the same level, but to your point, a better point, and that is if you have a job, but it's pretty precarious, and in today's world, no job is 100%. Obviously, you're going to really pull in your spending, because if you do get laid off, you are in for a protracted amount of time in your job search. And by the way, that's where most people, healthcare is number one, employment's number two, in terms of people going from first class to stowage in terms of their economic situation.
And remember, most Americans, despite all of the claims of Obamacare, still rely on their jobs to provide health insurance. So you said healthcare was number one. This is going to affect that as well. So again, the ripple effect is huge. There is some good economic news amid all of this. Producer price index came out this morning, and inflation, producer inflation, actually declined for the first time possibly since COVID. I don't have that stat in front of me, but it's been years since there's been an actual decline in inflation. So the producer price index is, for those of you not familiar with it, what businesses pay their suppliers for the components of what they're selling. So I had to explain this to someone earlier today, and I said, basically, this is the price that coffee producers are paying for their beans.
Isn't it a lagging indicator?
No, it's a leading indicator.
Okay, thank you for the clarification. It's going to show up later.
Yes, it's one of the first signs that inflation goes down.
There you go. Thank you for the correction. Well done. Now, getting back to that jobs number, could it be also that America's just dumb? Let me just say something, Dr. Lopkin, before you articulate things further. When I was a little lad back in the glory days, do you know what America was in terms of world ranking in education? Do you know that, Dr.
We were
Lopkin?
number one.
I'm talking 1, 2, who cares?
No.
Yes, 1. Let's just call it 1. why split hairs?
Yes.
Do you know what we are now? Since, by the way, the Department of Education was formed in 1978, one of Jimmy Carter's, amazing achievements. What are we now, Dr. Lopkin?
Yeah, we are now 31st in the world. And the reason we're talking about this now is because the new tests just came out. And this is the first time that 8th and 12th graders have been tested since COVID. And the math and reading scores were the lowest they have been in 20 years. So some of this is because of COVID learning deficits, but a big part of it is, again, because you're going back 20 years. This is the fact that the schools have stopped teaching reading and writing. They have focused on making the kids feel good and, making sure everybody feels included.
I would not argue with that, but I think it's even bigger than that. And I think it goes down to one of my bottom worst presidents, and that's George W. The No Child Left Behind was horrific.
Oh, No Child Left Behind was a disaster.
There you go. It did not help this 20-year trend. Well, is it the thing? No, but it is a thing. Everyone plays to the lowest common denominator. Excellence is not celebrated. In fact, you could make a case that excellence is punished. Dr. Lopkin.
Okay.
And let me just wait before you comment. Go ahead.
But that is true, but that's not coming from No Child Left Behind. No Child Left Behind was essentially a testing protocol. The problem wasn't with the protocol.
No child left behind means that all children have to succeed, and that puts inordinate amount of resources into the underachievers and takes away resources from the overachievers. That is true.
That is true, but that is it. The problem is not where the funding went, because America is spending more on education now than we did 20 years ago. And I'm not talking adjusted for inflation. I'm talking in absolute dollars. And we spend more than the next 10 countries combined. And yet we're still failing. The problem isn't the money. The problem is when the testing protocol went into effect, school systems stopped teaching education and started teaching just enough to pass the tests so they could get the funding.
Yes, but we are not letting our education. By the way, the Department of Education had a huge role in this debacle. Let's just be extremely clear on that.
The Department of Education is almost completely responsible because they're the ones that handed the standards down.
100%. But it's also not just the Department of Education and educators and No Child Left Behind. It's also societal. When you have a breakdown of society, when you have essentially in some cases like the inner city, like Baltimore, okay, no child passed, okay? And what is it? Is it the education system? 100%. But is it also the family unit? I say that shares some of the responsibility.
Well, it's even bigger than that. I mean, Baltimore is the perfect example because you do have the breakdown of the family unit. You have the failure of the education system, but you also have the rampant crime where the kids are going to school and they don't see any point to it because they already know they're going to be gangbangers. They're already slinging dope on the streets. I don't remember which season it was, but there was an entire season of the HBO show The Wire a while back that actually illustrated all of this. And I mean, that was the early 2000s. So that's how long this has been going on. And we haven't seen any improvement. So, yeah,
But
you've
it's
got.
not just about poverty, it's about the social structure of various groups. You could have, America has a history of very poor people doing extremely well educationally and economically one generation later. You look at immigrants from certain countries, come here with not a dime, they don't know how to speak English, and their kids are going to Harvard. So there is definitely, not all, but there's a big chunk of this, a societal situation that is sick.
Yes. And another part of the problem, and it goes to the societal breakdown, is that these kids are not being taught that they can succeed. They're essentially being told, oh, the game is stacked against you. There's no point in even trying. Capitalism is against you. So they're literally being brainwashed to not make the effort, to not bother learning. And another survey had come out last week. I believe we touched on it on last week's episode, where kids are essentially not believing in the American dream anymore. They don't believe if they work hard, they can succeed. And this is coming from essentially decades now of brainwashing that, quite frankly, to not to put too fine a point on it, lays at the feet of the teachers union.
Yeah, I'd say that certainly bears a lot of the majority of the responsibility. But I think it's not just that. Again, I'm not letting them off the hook in any way. It is a complete societal situation where you're having a breakdown in the family. You have no one's at home. You have out of the nest parents, and no one's paying the right attention to young people. They're buying them off with stupid gifts instead of focusing in on how'd you do in school. Yes, your point is 1,000% correct. It's also an indoctrination. Go ahead.
I think you're putting too much on that, because I grew up in the 70s and 80s where we were all latchkey kids. We came home, there was nobody home. We were responsible for doing our own homework. We were also responsible for doing housework. And we have dropped quite a bit since then. So it's not a fact that the parents aren't paying attention. It's the fact that...
Okay, you might have a point there. It's a quality of the parenting.
Yes.
That is a factor. Yes. You're right about that. And the indoctrination. The indoctrination is not just in the education system, it's all around them. And now it's even worse with social media, TikTok. What's the message there? It's not study hard, kiddies. No, it's doing the last tweaking dance, or, who knows? It is not a positive message. Well, and the message is, who needs this? Go ahead.
Right. That's another major factor in all of this. And we saw this over the last several years with college grads, where rather than actually wanting to go into an industry where they're contributing to society and helping build communities, the biggest draw that these kids wanted to do is they want to be social media influencers. Well, guess what?
Exactly.
These are not the best educated people in the world.
Nope. And you always look, it's like the lottery winner. Oh, some, hot chick did a video and now she's a multimillionaire. And oh, wow, who needs to work hard? And there's actually a work ethic problem in some of our youth, not all, not the newer or the younger, but those kind of, I don't know, 20 somethings, you see videos of them. Oh, I'm working and I can't go out on dates and stuff.
No, no,
Yeah. So there's some issues there.
actually it's not 20s anymore because the group is getting older. It is the younger group of the millennials. It is the older group of Gen Ys. We've started to see, because the 20-year-olds are now Gen Z, and Gen Z is actually the most entrepreneurial generation we've seen possibly since the baby boomers. So it's an older group now that's that problem. We've been talking about it so long that they've aged out of
Yeah,
being
you're
the
right.
20s.
It's aging before our very eyes. But speaking of something that's not aging, is the auto pen and its implications. Could you talk about that, Dr. Lopkin? In particular, the pardons.
Yeah, emails were just released by the Justice Department from the Biden Justice Department, where it turns out that the Justice Department had pushed back on these pardons because they were never consulted about them. Biden did not actually decide who was going to be pardoned. It was handled by other people, which, quite frankly, is blatantly illegal. And we've also seen testimony in front of Congress of people within the Biden White House who pushed back against the use of the auto pen. So we are seeing concrete evidence that, yes, they knew Biden wasn't using the auto pen. They knew he wasn't making the decisions, and people actually did push back, and they were silenced.
Well, actually, real quick, is in Kamala's new book that she didn't write, basically refers to him running as reckless. A little diss at Uncle Joe.
Well, I mean, she's, I don't often say this about Kamala Harris, but she's right. I mean, we said this back. I'm trying to remember if it was the podcast or if we were still on terrestrial radio at the time. But we had said in 2019.
No, we got fired. No, we got fired years before that.
Was okay?
Just kidding.
So I don't remember. I don't remember what year it was anymore. But
unceremoniously, by the way.
Yes. But we had reported in 2019 that the Democrats knew Biden had dementia. And we were told this by high-ranking members of Democratic state committees. And they just swept it under the rug. So, I mean, was it reckless for him to run in 2020? Absolutely. Was it absolutely horrific for him to run in 2024? Absolutely.
Not surprising. I think this auto pen's going to have a lot of legs. There's a lot of ink in that cartridge. How do you like that?
Yes.
Now, Dr. Lopkin, for our last issue of discussion, I would like, and I'm sure our listeners would like, your insights into why the conflict of the last week and the shores of Venezuela, why was it just beyond good viewing? What is it? What's its importance and ramifications, if you could shed some light on that, and even how it relates to NATO?
Yeah, this is actually I don't understand why the media is not covering this more fully. But what we are looking at right now, and again, not to put too fine a point on this, but we are literally in a world war. And it hasn't been declared. Nobody wants to talk about it. But this is what's going on. The U.S. Navy took out Venezuelan drug cartel boats. And I believe the Air Force also had some skirmishes against the Venezuelan drug cartels. Now, the problem with the cartels isn't simply that drugs are getting into the U.S. and killing people, as if that wasn't bad enough. But now it's coming out that Iran and Hezbollah have been partnering with the Venezuelan drug cartels to launder money. So every time the cartel is making money, Iran is taking their cut. Iran is now using that money to fund Hamas and Hezbollah and attacks on Israel, but they're also using it to fund their drone program. Now, why are the Iranian drones so important? Because they're selling those drones to Russia. Now, earlier in the...
Let me ask you one question real quick. And how did Iran get all that drone technology?
Yes, Iran got the initial drone technology because they shot down American drones back during the Obama administration, and we did not have any kind of self-destruct on it. We did not have any operation to retrieve the drones. So
why would you?
They took our drones, and now they've got what was our drone technology. And unfortunately, under the Biden administration, China has now leapfrogged us in drone technology, and they're also selling drones to Russia. So earlier in the week, Russia had the largest drone and missile attack on Ukraine since the invasion started. So much for these peace talks. Putin is actually ramping up the attacks. And this morning, the drones were shot down over Poland's airspace by not just Poland's Air Force, but NATO Air Command. So now, because Poland is part of NATO. Now, we've heard the term over and over again. And in the NATO charter, an attack on one is an attack on all. Now, Russia is claiming, Poland has no evidence that these were Russian drones. They came over the Russian-Polish border. Who else is going to be doing this? Especially given
Iceland.
Right. Iceland's going to be using drones to attack Poland over the Russia-Poland border. And it wasn't, 6 or 7 drones that wandered off course. This was a major incursion into Polish airspace. So now we have just tied together Venezuela, Russia, Iran, Hezbollah, Hamas, China, and last week, in a show of force highlighting the Chinese military, you had standing on the podium at the parade Kim Jong-un, Vladimir Putin, and Xi Jinping together.
Reminiscent of 1938, isn't it?
Yes, it is.
Very scary. And I think I agree with you 1,000%. The press, which used to be the press, is talking about all this shit that really no one really gives a shit about, like baseballs in Philadelphia or in, I should say, Miami by a Philly fan, whereas we've been very close to World War III for the last 4 years, 3 years.
Yeah, between the attacks on Israel and the attacks on Ukraine and the economic attacks from China, we have never been closer to another world war. And instead of talking about this, instead of giving the American public the information they need to understand what is going on in the world, U.S. media has been more focused on the Taylor Swift engagement.
Oh, yes, there's no question about that. But we've lost the press years ago. I think you need to tell your alma mater, Ithaca, to get their school of journalism in order. Though you're going to have to do that when you make your next million. Put a grant in there. There you go.
But that we talk a lot about the deterioration of the media, and usually we're talking about it in terms of politics. But this is literally a matter of life and death. And they're not focusing on all of the ramifications of what is going on. They're more focused on defending Biden and blaming Trump and defending the Palestinians than they
I
are.
will interject a point, Dr. Lopkin. I'm not so sure it doesn't tie into your assertion about our plummeting educational system. I'm not so sure, and I mean this in all sincerity, that the journalists of today, I don't think they have the brains to understand it. I'm dead serious.
No, the journalists of today are not trained the way I learned journalism. I have seen story after story where the only source they have is a tweet. Now, when I was trained as a journalist, you didn't get a story on the air or in print unless you had three independent sources. The sources could not be related to each other, and at least one of them had to go on the record. It has been at least 15 years that I started seeing stories coming out with one anonymous source and no backup.
And I would agree. I agree with that. That's a structural situation. And I agree with you 100%. But I also think there's the lack of cranium situation because I think it's a combination. They're just digging right to the point. They're lazy and stupid. You telling me some of these morons on the air, Rachel Maddow, could actually understand the geopolitical, military, strategic implications? You
okay,
nuts?
using Maddow as an example, though, that is a big problem with the media because Rachel Maddow is not a journalist. Joy Reid was not a journalist. What you have are commentators. These folks have no particular training in doing research and doing journalism. I mean, certainly Jen Psaki.
No, you said it. You said it right there. You said it much better than I did. Yes, they talk or they recite the news, but there's nothing behind it. You could basically have an avatar.
Exactly. And that is the big problem with media, is that journalism, it goes across all of the platforms. I've been naming, MS Now, MSNBC, whatever you want to call it, people, but
I call it shit.
Right. It's the same thing at Fox News. It's the same thing at CNN. It's the same thing at News Nation and at Newsmax. Basically, you've pretty much got each of these networks has 2 hours or so during the day when they actually have journalists on the air. And the rest is commentary. The other 24 hours a day is commentary repeating what was done in the 2 hours and pontificating on it.
No question. But it's commentary wrapped in the illusion of journalism, which is actually more dangerous.
Yeah, and now we are really seeing, because again, nobody questioned the auto pen. Nobody questioned the job numbers. Nobody is investigating what's actually going on with these international ties.
I think with the auto pen, they should have done a forensic accounting of all the ink that they had to buy. Just kidding.
That's not a bad point, though. I mean, think about how much taxpayer money was spent on ink for the auto pen.
It was good for Staples. Their stock went up 3%.
Right.
Over the Biden administration.
And before we sign off, a quick update on Charlie Kirk. There is a suspect in custody. Footage has shown Charlie Kirk being hit in the neck by the shots. Blood can be seen gushing from the apparent wound and students screaming. The university has confirmed that shots were fired, that the suspect is in custody, but has not provided an update on Kirk's condition.
Well, Dr. Lopkin, I love the new format, focusing on particular issues, and we will be doing that next week. And because we're more issue oriented in terms of our focus, our listeners can contribute to the process as always, can't they?
Yes, they can. We want to hear what issues are important to you. Are you worried about your job? Are you concerned about the international situation? What matters to you? You can message us at thexvadio.com/connect. You can also message us through the Carnivore Radio Facebook page. And of course, you can hear every episode of Carnivore Bites at xvadio.com, the Carnivore Radio website, Apple Podcasts app, YouTube, Rumble, Spotify, iHeartRadio, Audible, Amazon Music, and other platforms that respect freedom of speech.
Thank you, Dr. Lopkin. Great show. See you next week.
We'll see you then.